Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. Each week we meet and we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. We also talk about Plum Island, and we're going to talk about Plum Island today. Plum Island is an integral part of the Merrimack River, and also the histories are quite intertwined as well. So I'm writing a book titled Merrimack. No, that was my last book, Merrimack, the Resilient River. What I'm writing about now is Plum Island, a vulnerable gem. Here you see a photo of the southern end of Plum Island, and we're going to be looking at some photos of Plum Island and also the old days around the turn of the century, 1890, 1900, because the history of Plum Island is very rich and very interesting and not too well known. I'm focusing on Plum Island here, and as I speak to you, I want to be sure that I illustrate my talk, because some people listen on the radio, 96.2, Joppa Radio, FM, and some people watch on television, local cable, Channel 9. So as we go through this, I will be talking about the history of Plum Island through photos, but I will endeavor to illustrate what I'm talking about in words, because some people are listening and not watching. So here is Plum Island several years ago. This is the southern end. In the distance, you see the wildlife refuge. That is the Paca River National Wildlife Refuge. And it is more than half of the island, and it is dedicated to wildlife and particularly waterfowl. Many thousands, if not millions of birds use the reservoir, the preservation area at Plum Island to rest while they're migrating, north to Greenland and the Arctic and south to Florida and some of the South American countries. But this is a situation, and if you live around here, what we're looking at is Plum Island, the lower end of the residential area, which has been built up in recent years. And there are a lot of rocks and boulders in this particular photo, and that addresses the fact that in recent years, there's been tremendous erosion, and homeowners there have been bringing in rocks and boulders and bric-a-brac to put in front of their homes in an effort to hold off the erosion. In many cases, this does not work. But people keep doing it. And, maybe a larger question is, why do the two communities, Newbury and Newburyport, continue to give out building permits? In fact, in this particular slide to the right, you see a house being built. The porch is just being put together. And so they are taking the places of houses that are no longer there, that were disabled by erosion, by storms, or whatever. And I should mention that storms going back centuries have always come to Plum Island. I think we know that in our minds, but sometimes we don't focus on it. And tonight, it could be another difficult time at Plum Island, at Reservoir Terrace, which we'll talk about in a moment. Here is a picture of the northern end of Plum Island. And you can see some of the things, if you're from the area, if you're listening, what we're looking at the bottom of the slide is this, what's known as the center commercial area. A groin has been put in. Those are bric-a-brac and rocks going into the ocean. But this is a beautiful shot showing the basin to the upper right. It shows part of the marsh to the left. And you can see the opening of the Merrimack River in the upper right, and off in the distance of Salisbury. So this indicates that much building has been done over the years. There are about 1,100 dwellings on Plum Island. And in this case, you see that mostly the Newburyport end It seems to have more dunes in front of it, and it seems to be holding off the ocean in a little better way. But Plum Island has been here for centuries, and what we're looking at is really a wonderful shot that shows the marsh. It shows the basin. It shows the Merrimack River. Quite a beautiful photo, which I am putting in my next book. Here is a shot from ground zero, if we can use the term. This is the opening of the Merrimack River, and thousands, if not millions, of vessels have come through here over the years. Now, the opening of the Merrimack River is narrow. It is shallow. Each year, sandbars build up. And even today, it's known as one of the most difficult ports in New England to come into, because we have a strong current. The Merrimack River is going towards the east. The tides come in from the west, and sometimes the tides interact with the current of the river and make it choppy and make it very difficult. But here you can see a good shot. There are a couple vessels in the distance, small pleasure craft. That is the northern jetty to your left and the southern jetty to your right. And as you may have known, the southern jetty was rebuilt 4 or 5 years ago and has created a new flow and a new movement of sand in that area of Reservoir Terrace. And several houses are really under duress there. The water is coming very close to their front porches. We can't see them here, although we did have slides of that last week where I showed some of the houses that were, the water is just about up to the front porch right now. And I must say, I asked this question, well, why do they build so close to the water? And this is 73rd, 75th, 77th Street in the Newburyport sector. But I did have a talk with an engineer recently, and he said, excuse me, no one expected the changes in the sand structure that happened so quickly. They had several hundred feet of sand between them and high tide just a couple of years ago. But in part because of the rebuilding of the southern jetty, they now have maybe 10 or 15 feet. So if these builders and these home buyers had known that so much sand would disappear, excuse me, they likely would not have built. But it wasn't known. And right now, a dozen houses are under duress. And tonight, this is a Tuesday, October 26th, and it's raining. There's going to be heavy tides. And so those homes are probably, owners of those homes are probably quite concerned about what's going to happen. The whole of Plum Island was discovered in 1605 by Samuel de Champlain. And what we're looking at now is a map produced by Englishman John Smith in about 1626. So it's rather remarkable that so many years ago, these individuals are gifted and they could draw their own maps. This might not be as accurate as you would think, but you can see Cape Cod at the bottom. You can see some of the Cape Ann in the middle of the sector. And all the way up, you can see Cape Elizabeth, which is in Maine. So I plan to use this rather remarkable map in my book about Plum Island, but here is one of the very first maps of northern New England, and it's really a treasure, and I'm glad I was able to find it. A lot of the really colorful history of Plum Island happened around the turn of the century. Here's a picture of the Plum Island Hotel in about 1905 or 1910. It was part of a postcard, and you can see a beautiful old hotel. It had views of the ocean. It could handle probably about 60 to 70 rooms. It was built in about 1890 and it was expanded. And so this is about 1910. And Plum Island was a great place to come even back then. Now, one of the elements of the history of Plum Island is, does the bridge work? Right now, we have a bridge going from on the Northern Boulevard and the Plum Island Turnpike. It takes you straight onto Plum Island. But in the old days, bridges washed out. Nevertheless, Plum Island became a very popular place to go, and the hunting was very good. Before people had boats, or had their own pleasure boats, or before there were a lot of cars around, people would come. This is 19th century I'm talking about. They'd come in a horse and buggy. They'd stay at the Plum Island Hotel, and they'd go duck hunting or they'd go fishing. So I think this was probably a wonderful time to be around. And there are many people and many stories of how much people enjoyed Plum Island. And again, we're talking 1900 or 1910. This old postcard shows the ocean front of Plum Island in Newburyport. And this is, people, of course, did not wear bikinis or Speedos or any of those things. What we're looking at is 3 or 4 women and a gentleman. The women are in long white dresses with snappy white hats. They're having umbrellas over their heads, not because it's raining. They probably would not be sitting there if it's raining, but because they did not want to get too much sunlight. There's also a gentleman there in a dark suit and a tie and a bowler hat. And so even back then, more than a century ago, it looks like fun. And I have read that there weren't too many houses at the turn of the century on Plum Island, but here you can see it's quite populated. We're looking at a dozen houses. I think you can see a lighthouse in the background, which is still there. So this looks like a fun moment at Plum Island. It's more than a century ago. One of the interesting elements about Plum Island a century ago is that they had transportation, public transportation, from the downtown of Newburyport onto the island. And this is a particular case, is a trolley. This trolley started at Market Square in Newburyport and came down to Plum Island and would bring people down here. And this is a wonderful photo, isn't it? It's just, terrific. You see some children on the side. You see a dozen different summer cottages, and you see the trolley with a conductor. And so this is really a timepiece. I enjoy this greatly. An old shot of Plum Island when trolleys would bring the public out to Plum Island. One of the relatively unknown realities of Plum Island was how many ships got in trouble and how many ships sank off of Plum Island. The photo we're looking at is from 1892, and it is a photo. I've often looked at it and said, this is so well staged, it must have been painted. But I am assured by people at the Custom House Maritime Museum that this was a photo. And what we're looking at is a three-mast commercial bark off of Plum Island. It is under duress, and you have a life-saving crew of about 6 paddling rapidly out to the vessel to see if they can save anybody. And hundreds of ships went down, even when they were very close to Plum Island. One of the reasons is there's a large arc between from Cape Ann up to, say, Salisbury. And so if a vessel was pushed by the wind very close to the shore, it was very hard for them to tack out of it because they're pushed in and yet they couldn't tack back out of it. This is, and you can see the sails have come down in this vessel. I suspect they took them down because they didn't want to get blown any further. And they also wanted to just stay still if they could and wait for this rescue service. But many hundreds of ships went down off of Plum Island. And one thing that I remember, or I think about frequently, is these ships, commerce, took place throughout the winter, November, December, January, February, March. Commerce was still taking place. Vessels from Portland would go to Boston. Vessels from Newburyport would go up to Camden. There was a steady trade, and there are diaries that talk about how difficult it was to sail in bad weather. The snow would pile up on the vessel. There would be ice on the deck. The stays and the sails would freeze up. So it was a very difficult situation. And here is one of the first great photos that I have seen of a rescue crew going out right off of Plum Island to try to save this vessel. And you can notice that the rescue crew, they have life preservers on. And so that seems obvious, but even today, a lot of people on pleasure craft in Newburyport do not wear life preservers. And the Coast Guard is very adamant in urging people to wear their life preservers. You never know what'll happen. But this is a case where the crew of this rescue vessel, they have life preservers on, and they're doing the best they can to reach this vessel. Here is gun practice at Plum Island. And this is, the sequence is deliberate here because in the old days, they had what was called the Lyle cannon, which is what he's firing now. And again, for those listening on the radio, there are 3 men here, and there are about 3 cannons, and they're practicing the art of sending a large hook from the cannon, and it is being propelled to a vessel out about 100 yards off. Well, I'd say less than that, maybe 100 feet offshore. Because what would happen if you'd get into a big storm, particularly in the winter, they couldn't get out in a boat to save these people, but they would shoot a cannon with this hook, and it put the hook onto the vessel. And in many cases, the crew members could hold on to this line and get to the shore by doing that. But this is quite unique. I don't know how long this practice lasted, but they're very diligent to be practicing. And as I say to radio listeners, there are several cannons here. There's probably a 30-foot sloop out there they're shooting at, and they're trying to get one of these hooks out to the boat out so they can do that when worst times happen. And so we're talking about Plum Island today. This is the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. I am Dyke Hendrickson, the host, on 96.3 FM Joppa Radio and Channel 9 local cable TV. Here is a photo from Plum Island. It shows 5 or 6 life-saving professionals. They're standing in front of one of their life-saving stations. They have a vessel just like we saw in the previous photo. It's about 22 feet. It can hold 5 or 6 rowers, and they would go out and try to save people. Now, the birthplace of the Coast Guard is Newburyport, started in 1790. But the term Coast Guard wasn't actually used until 1915. And at that time, what was, the Revenue Cutter Service, which started here, was merged with the Life-Saving Service in 1915 to start the Coast Guard. And in 1939, those 2 organizations were merged with the Lighthouse Service. So in 1939, we had the 3 different organizations come together to make the Coast Guard. And many of these life-saving stations over the years have been washed away by storms. It's true. Many of them just were wiped away. And so in 1973, here on Plum Island, the Coast Guard station was moved after a debacle and much erosion and many storms. It was moved to Water Street in Newburyport, where it is right now. It's brick. It has two 47-footers out front of it. It's very helpful. It saves numerous boats each summer when it goes out. But the Coast Guard was born here in Newburyport in 1790. It became known as the Coast Guard in 1915. And now the Coast Guard station on Water Street has about 26 coasties there. They don't stay overnight unless there's an emergency. They live right in town, but they're a great help to this community. Here is a beautiful pleasure boat called the Carlotta. Grape Island, of course, is on Plum Island. And this was a vessel that could go into Newburyport at high tide. It would leave Grape Island along the Parker River. It would go on the ocean. It would come up to Newburyport. And it just looks like a wonderful vessel to move up and down the river. And of course, into Plum Island. It was steam driven, as you can see. You can see a steam emission pipe there. And so it would take 12 to 15. It would also take tourists. People would get on in Newburyport, go along Plum Island, and it would come up into the area between Plum Island and Ipswich and enter the Parker River there, or it could come out into the Parker River itself. But there's a great old shot of the steamer Carlotta. The jetties of Plum Island have been there for many years. They started in 1871, believe it or not. Here's a photo from about 1890, and it shows one long jetty, and they were trying to hold back the storms and hold back the water. And people always like to walk along the jetties, as you can see, perhaps a dozen people in this photo walking along the jetty. And you also see a vessel there, a rowboat, that is tied up. This is a low tide, it appears, and so at high tide, it'll be ready to go out again. But jetties have been part of the area from, as I say, starting in 1870. They finished in about 1900. They were redone over the years. In 1960, in the 60s, they were recapped, if you will. That means they were put more rocks and boulders on top of them. And again, just a few years ago, 2014, 2015, both the Northern Jetty and the Southern Jetty were rebuilt. It was close to a $20 million effort by federal funds. And I remember I covered many of the meetings. I used to work for the Daily News here in Newburyport. I covered many of the meetings when they were discussing redoing the South and North jetties. And the reason for doing the jetties was to improve navigation. It's to hold off some of the sand and silt that would come into the river, and to enable the boats to go up and down the river. Because if they gathered too much silt and from the ocean, from the incoming tides, they would get sandbars. It would get very shallow. I mention this because a lot of homeowners on Plum Island now are upset about the rebuilding of the jetties, because they feel the restructure of the South Jetty has a lot to do with the changing tides that occur there and the increased erosion. And they might be right about that, although there is a scientific group from William and Mary College in Virginia. It's the Maritime Institute of William and Mary, who has studied the problem, and they are not ready to say that is definitely what happened. They say it probably made things worse, but it didn't totally make this new threat to reservoir terrorists. It didn't make it happen. But nevertheless, the northern and southern jetties were redone. It has changed the way the ocean moves. It has put more duress on reservoir terrace, which is in the Newburyport end. And so there's always been a challenge on Plum Island with erosion, with high tides, with storms. And but again, I say that the jetty was put there not to, change the way the beaches were, because in their view, that's not what they do. I'm talking about the Coast Guard Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers. They were there to try to improve navigation. Here's a wonderful shot on the beach at Plum Island. You can see people really got dressed up to go to the beach. The women are in wonderful hats, long dresses. The men have their caps on. This is about 1910 or so. And you can see, many houses in the background, many people enjoying the beach. And so in those days, as we discussed, there was more public transportation to the beaches. So you can get on a horse and buggy, you can get on a trolley, and you could come to Newburyport. You leave Newburyport Center and you come down to Plum Island for a nice day. And here's another shot of Plum Island. This is a postcard. Here's a trolley. There was a theater there on Plum Island. It sounds like it was a great deal of fun. Maybe I was born a century too late, who knows? But taking a trolley, going to a show on Plum Island, going to the beach, it all looks like a great deal of fun. This is another, wonderful asset that existed on Plum Island, and we're looking at Plum Island Pavilion. And it exists in the center now where the old Geiger snack bar is right now. I must say that several of the hotels that we looked at burnt down in 1913 and 1914. In the 20s and through the 30s, the pavilion existed there, and you can see many people lined up. To the right, it looks like it's a bandstand. And so people would take the transportation out, they go to the beach, they have a picnic, and then they go dancing at the pavilion in the evening and take the trolley back. And my doubles partner, Dick Canepa, his mother, he's a longtime Newburyport resident and longtime teacher at Pentucket. His mother remembers going out there for roller skating in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and then they would come home. So this is the pavilion of Plum Island. We're coming to an end of our session, but it certainly is interesting to me. And here again are these people on the beach. Here's a modern shot. Again, I'm writing a book about Plum Island. This is from the basin. And the basin is a wonderful spot as well. And there are numerous vessels there and just a lot of ways to enjoy recreation. The beachfront, this is the town of Newbury. As you know, Newbury and Newburyport share most of the island. What we're looking at is a picture of the Beachfront Snack Bar. It's had many names over the years. I can't remember them all, but it's been many things. Right now, it's the beachfront. You can park here if you live in Newbury and get a snack. This has been revamped in recent years and is a great asset to the island. Here's another shot down at the basin. You can see what a pleasant spot it is. And we're going to end about here. This is a shot from the center in Plum Island. It's looking at the ocean. In the foreground, as it looks like several pairs of Birkenstocks that people probably walked from their cars or walked from parking. They took off their, sandals and are walking or swimming. But, and people, again, ask me why, Plum Island is so popular and people love to live there or go down there. Well, it's just a beautiful spot, as you can see. This is a recent addition to the area. And this is the at the Refuge. There's parking for 90 cars. You can walk to the beach, and it has been improved. This was put in about 1998 or 2000. The start of it was, and then that particular building was done a half dozen years ago. So that's going to be it for the day. I am Dyke Hendrickson. This is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. Nowadays, we're including Plum Island in that general term of the Merrimack. This is 96.3 Joppa Radio FM, local Channel 9 cable television. We talk about the Merrimack River, and the life and its history. Thank you for being with us. We'll be here again next week, and we'll talk more about the Merrimack River, Plum Island, and the North Shore. Thank you for being with us.